Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again on another episode of CRAAPy Conversations. Today's episode is brought to us by the letter P for purpose, and I am joined by my colleague, the wonderful Scottie Kapel, and we're going to be talking about purpose. So, Scottie, how would you describe purpose when we're talking about kind of assessing sources of information?
So, in a nutshell, purpose is why the thing or the resource exists and for whom.
hmm And why would that be important? Why is it important to know why a resource exists?
So, purpose is important because it's really asking you, the researcher, to think critically about what a resource is sharing, the information included, why it exists, for whom it was written, and in some cases, who contributed to its creation. So it's asking you to look at some of the tactics employed by the author or creator to get that desired outcome from the intended audience. So if you want, we can look at an example.
Oh, please.
One of my own personal heroes.
And who is that?
It is Michael
Oh,
Jordan.
really?
Yes, yes, indeed. And if you don't know who he is, let's just stop the video now and
Yeah,
we'll
I've never heard of
do
him.
some reading about MJ. So if we have Michael Jordan as our topic, there
hmm
are all these forms of communication that exist about him.
hmm
And I'm going to talk about these as writing, but writing in the broadest sense. So we have things like the Space Jam website, which
Oh,
was
it's a classic.
classic, still available to this day, years later. You've got biographies, you have a Sports Illustrated article, you have a paper and presentation that I wrote and delivered in sixth grade, you have scholarly articles, and even advertisements for products. So as you can see, we've got the same subject for all of these different forms of writing, but very different types of information being presented, very different purposes, and very different audiences. So as a researcher, when you're researching your topic, you're going to see all these different types of information, and it's really up to you to ascertain why that information was created and for what purpose. So was it created to inform, to entertain? Is it presenting information such as facts or opinion or propaganda? And these are all kinds of questions you need to work through as you look at your various potential sources.
All right, let's clear all this stuff out of the way. And so how would you describe differently like the purpose of like the paper you wrote versus like the scholarly article that was written?
So scholarly articles, we'll start with those.
hmm
Those are typically written to inform, to share new information, new knowledge, and they're typically written for a very specific audience, and that audience is other experts in the
hmm
field. If you contrast that against the presentation I was giving, which yes, was informed by some facts, but was also probably very heavily influenced by my own personal opinion and love for Michael
hmm
Jordan.
So
So
you
that
probably
was really
painted a pretty rosy picture.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and it was geared towards other sixth
hmm
graders. So the language was definitely different. The sources used were very, very different.
hmm
So yeah, you've got different types of,
Probably
and
more likely to pull off the Space Jam website than a scholarly
exactly,
article.
yes.
So okay, cool. So yeah, so when we're talking about scholarly writing, how would you say like the purpose is different? Like we talked about how the audience is different for scholarly writing. What would the purpose be for scholarly writing as opposed to the Space Jam website, or actually let's do the Gatorade ad. We'll do
Right, yeah. So again, scholarly writing is written typically to share new knowledge. So it's presenting a lot of new research, and it's there to inform other experts
Mhm,
about these new findings. So popular writing, things like advertisements, magazine articles, they may be there to inform, but they may also be to persuade, to sell, to entertain.
mhm.
So if we look at that Gatorade ad specifically, advertisements are very much created for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to sell whatever product it is it's advertising.
Mhm.
You have other sources that may have some combined purposes. So thinking back to that Space Jam website, it was definitely there to entertain. So it's got games, it's got coloring pages for kids to use, but it's also very much designed to sell tickets to the movies and any related merchandise that they created in
Oh
conjunction.
yeah, there was tons and tons of that.
Yes, yes, I think I had a good bit of it
Oh
myself.
yeah, I might have had my Space Jam T-shirt as a kid. So so there's different purposes behind things. What about documentaries? Because I know that's one a lot of students I know and a lot of people in general tend to get a little stuck on, like what the purpose of a documentary is. And obviously every documentary is going to be a little different, but I think that's a kind of a medium where people don't really know what to do with when it comes to purpose. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so documentaries can be a little bit tricky. Some people automatically assume that they're scholarly sources. They are not. Hopefully, they are relying on factual information, but a lot of times they're created to inform. Sometimes you're going to see some persuasion tactics in them. So it just really varies based on the documentary itself.
Okay, thanks. And let's talk a little bit about bias and how bias plays a role. We talked about your presentation that you did in sixth grade, and that might even like kind of lean towards being like Michael Jordan propaganda, but
Yes.
like pro Michael Jordan propaganda. But how would you say bias plays a role in the purpose of something?
So bias is just basically a leaning or a predisposition or proclivity for or against something.
Mhm.
And bias is really important as you go about evaluating a source's purpose because it can very much influence the message.
Okay. And would you say if you see that something's biased, you know, you're examining a piece of information, you see that there's bias in there, would you say that's disqualifying?
Not necessarily.
Mhm.
So, quite often we think of bias as this inherently bad thing, and that we need to look for sources that are entirely unbiased.
Mhm.
And the reality is, it's really hard to escape bias. So, we all, as a human population, have biases.
Mhm.
And these are based on our own lived experiences. And they influence every aspect of our life, including our writing.
Mhm.
So sometimes you'll see writing where those biases are included unintentionally, and other times it can be quite intentional. But when you are a researcher, it is your duty to kind of interrogate those biases. And sometimes those are really critical to your particular research that you're doing. So, for instance, if you're researching all of the arguments around a really controversial issue, identifying all those various biases that surround it will be really important to your particular argument. So, no, right off the bat, it's not an immediate disqualifying factor, but you do really want to be thoughtful about identifying those biases and kind of interrogating how they fit into your particular research.
So being aware of bias is not necessarily throwing out something because you see there's a bias, just knowing what those biases are and what role they play.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, cool. So, all right, is there any other thoughts you have on purpose that we didn't get to that you want to talk about a little bit?
Yeah, so I think purpose is, we're all applying the CRAAP test in various ways,
Mhm.
whether we are doing so knowingly or not. But purpose, especially as you go out into your world as academics, into your careers, and even just your own personal interests, you always want to kind of have those thoughts in mind. So don't trust everything that you read online. Don't trust everything that you see in your social media feed. You really want to think, what was the intended outcome of this particular piece of writing, and how is it trying to get me as the reader to fall into that? So you really want to think critically about every source you use, whether it's in your academics, it's in your scholarship, or in just your own formation of, your political beliefs, the products you choose to buy, anything really.
Mhm. All right. So, in a nutshell, I guess, be aware of the purpose. So, why the information exists. It exists for a reason. It's not just thrown out there. So, know why that exists and be aware of any kind of biases or thought points that I guess bias. Yeah, we'll just say bias. So, any kind of bias that the author and creators as a whole. So, not just the author, but maybe the publisher or any other sponsors involved in the creation might have. So, yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. This brings us to our final video in the standard CRAAP test, CRAAP, on CRAAPy conversations. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Scottie, for talking to us today. And take care, everyone. Bye.